Welcome everybody, come on in and have a seat. I don't want to start too late. I know people will scream in.
It's like tutoring, but like a
I always think at the end of the semester, all good things must come to an end, but they must not. There's still an opportunity for you to take Newton in future semesters. It is always a pleasure to remain in contact with many of you. A number of you I've seen outside of class, which has been fantastic. And as you've heard through the semester, there's times that people are sitting in this audience who are then on stage. So stay in connection if you would. I wish all of you all good luck on your exams. I look forward to reading your reflections, and painfully and joyfully, I read every one of them. So thank you very much for keeping them a little bit shorter and concise. I think you all know that on the 6th, the final reflections are due. I would really appreciate your input on our evaluation forms. We have about a 10% response rate so far. I'd like to get that a little bit higher. And I wanted to introduce you to a couple of people before we even get to our speakers. Laura Hassner, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind standing. Laura is the Changemaker person together with Rich Lyons. I'm sure there's a more official title, but without Laura, we wouldn't have this room every Tuesday night when we are in person. So thank you very much, Laura, and thank you all. It really is an honor to be in a class with you all, so thank you for that. And speaking of honors, we have 2 students introducing speakers today. I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind, can you flip to the next slide? Can you do that on my computer? There you go. Oh, one back. Yes, perfect. And there you all are. Pranav and Nitish, you'll both say something about yourself, if you don't mind, and you'll introduce our moderator and our speaker, and then we're off to the races.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and welcome to the last session of the Newton Lecture Series, Spring 2022. My name is Pranav Ketan, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for the evening, Ms. Diane Dwyer. Diane has been a journalist for about 25 years, and not to mention has also received the Emmy Award twice. Diane, your confidence and diligence just really inspires me so much. A bit more about Diane. She is also a professional faculty member at the Haas School of Business, and she created the course called Innovations in Communications and Public Relations, which focuses on strategies and related to tech media and design thinking. Diane also runs her own media consulting business and serves as an MC, auctioneer, and advisor for more than 24 nonprofits, and also is a real estate agent.
Hi all, I'm Nitish. I'm a EECS major at UC Berkeley, and I would like to introduce Rob Solomon today. As you all may know, Rob Solomon co-founded GoFundMe in 2010. And since then, over $9 billion through over 120 million users have been raised through that platform. And it's almost fascinating to see how this platform has made finance more accessible to the world over time. Outside GoFundMe, Rob is involved with Yahoo and Groupon and has made early stage investments in several companies, including Slack, Okra, and Instawork. And with GoFundMe as the center of the crowdfunding space, I'm sure we're all excited to see how, to learn more about Rob's journey and see how he's grown from it.
So let's give a round of applause to our speakers and start the evening.
Okay, is it on? Does it feel on? I can shout though. I can do this really well. I don't know. I thought we tested it, but maybe we didn't. Let me just check. These are
green light. Green light. I think I'm on.
All right.
Hello.
There you go. Thank you. Okay. There we go. Hi. Now it's on. Hello, everybody. How are you? Everybody feeling good? Yeah? Feeling good? All right. So before we get started, Rob had sort of a a moment on the way to campus, kind of reliving your time coming here as far, well, 2 moments as far as something sort of happening on campus and then where you stopped on the way in. Can you just fill us in on your afternoon, just because it's sort of telling?
So I hope it's an auspicious signal, but I burnt shit on me while I was walking by the camp kneeling. So
it's supposed to be good luck.
They say it's good
us.
luck.
Yes.
And I went to Top Dog, my favorite haunt from the old days. So
Top Dog still popular? Still a thing? Yes. Okay, good. All right. And then, and we're curious, there was some kind of protest going on.
yeah, we saw a protest, but we had to drive around. Anyone what was happening on the north side?
Anybody got anything?
They were blocking the streets and everything.
Well, see, there you
go. It felt
go.
like the 1980s. It was great.
Exactly. That was when we were here a long time ago. All right. So first off, Rob, thank you very much for driving over here back to your alma mater today to do this. Very cool of you. Can we just, I mean, really nice of them. So thank you. And so we went to college together. We knew each other. We weren't tight, but we knew each other. But we could probably come up with a few stories on each other if we wanted to, which we won't do now.
Which we don't want to do.
Well, maybe later, maybe later.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, you're a history major who succeeded in business. I'm a journalist who was a business major. So lesson 1 from the 2 of us would be what you major in is great, but probably might not end up being what you end up doing with the rest of your life.
I think that's true. However, if I was smart enough to be a computer science major, it might have changed everything. But I think what you kind of do after college helps guide what you're going to end up doing in your career. So, a lot of people worry a lot about their first job or what they've majored in. And, I think there's this collective set of experiences that guide your career over time. So if you know what you want to do, hallelujah. If you don't, which is the case that I had when I graduated, there is a path that you'll follow that will get you to the place you need to go. So it's not that important to think too hard the first job or even the major, in my opinion, but other people would have a different point of view on that, I'm sure.
I'm with you on that point of view. And the one thing, and we've talked about this before, Cal, my classes were fantastic, but the most I learned from Cal was actually just sort of being here, the people I met, managing the system that's here, right? You have to get the class you need, like sort of learning those skills, to me was really valuable.
Totally. So I used to joke with my friends who got into Stanford. They would get into Stanford because they did really well in high school. And once they were in, they could never fail out. Whereas at Berkeley, if you screwed up and you didn't do well in certain classes, you could end up on probation, you could end up getting kicked out. So we had a lot harder thing, and I think that's true of a lot of different experiences. And it's very hard to get into certain classes here, or it was back in the 80s. I'm not sure if that's still the case. And I think you learn a lot more about real life at a place like this versus some other institutions that kind of hold your hand throughout the process. That, to me, was the most important thing, just how do you figure out the system? And it wasn't that easy back in the old days. I'm not sure if it's gotten easier. I'm sure it's a tiny bit easier with the internet and all those things. But I think it's a pretty amazing place where you do have to figure out a lot. And I think it does make a big difference as you enter the quote unquote real world.
Yeah, and I even think about it in journalism. I had to learn how to get an interview from someone who may not want to have given me that interview, or you with a job. And you learned ways to maneuver around the system to sort of get what you needed, right? In a way, I don't know. I thought those skills were really valuable as I ended up. Yeah.
I mean, I think you do have to just work harder at it at a gigantic institution like this. And it's frustrating at times and it's challenging at times, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, as I guess Taylor says, or somebody else who said that before her. Totally agree.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we're going to there's a timeline here that shows how great you are, just so you know.
Oh, God.
It's pretty impressive, right? All these different names that became, Yahoo, you led that to becoming such a giant company, and then you left and it fell apart. They couldn't make it without you. I mean, that's how it goes. But the way we're going to form it a little bit, the conversation, and then we'll open it up to questions, because your questions are always the most interesting and the most relevant versus a gal from a couple generations back, but we'll do 3 sort of stories. We're going to focus. So sort of life Cal, first job, and then one of the biggest sort of business decisions she ever made, if we can kind of do that. Okay, so I was surprised. So I was doing my due diligence, right, to talk to you, and that you were first gen coming into Cal. Am I not right? You're looking at me like that's totally not right. First generation. Were you the first in your family to go to college? Okay. So just take us back a little bit to where you grew up and how you got into Cal.
Yeah. So I snuck in the side door at Cal. So I grew up in New York City and then Miami, Florida. And in Miami, I became a swimmer. And I got pretty good as a swimmer. My parents had 5 kids, and they threw us in a pool to take care of us for 3 or 4 hours a day. And then I moved to Southern California to finish out high school. And I played water polo in high school. And I ended up playing at Cal. And I was a decent student, but not probably good enough to get into Cal. And the water polo certainly helped get me in here, which I don't know if I'm too proud of, but it worked. And sometimes you do have to find the side doors in life and take advantage of those side doors any chance you get when you can't always enter the front door.
And what was it like for you just sort of being here as a student? I mean, student athletes, it's hard. But also, if your parents hadn't been to college, I mean, what was that experience like doing this on your own a little bit?
Well, I mean, it wasn't that hard. I have 3 older brothers who all went to college before me. One was at UCLA, one was at Columbia, one went to
one of them's
Berkeley
in the building.
Yeah,
but,
one of them's in the building. He happens to be visiting from New York. So, it wasn't that hard because of the support system that my parents created in terms of making sure that we all got into good colleges and we're ready for that. So it's not necessarily a true first generation college story, though I guess maybe I think my dad went to the University of Miami for like a quarter and failed out, but he's tried.
Fair enough. And then getting here and sort of people talk a lot about how sports can form how you work in business and how you do those kinds of things. Yeah. Some lessons from sort of your days with, it was an incredible team.
Yeah, so we were lucky. I played for this legendary coach, a guy named Pete Catino. He was I think he was the winningest water polo coach in United States history. Kind of a mean, one-eyed, gigantic Sicilian philosopher, sadist. He was pretty mean. So he taught us a lot about drive, determination, ambition, how to win, how to compete. And I think in business, those things are all really important. Not saying that what you learn in the classroom isn't equally important, perhaps even more important. But for me, it was really, I think one of the things that helped get me to certain roles and learn how to, achieve certain success in business. So, really, really lucky in a lot of ways to have, had both the Cal education and that athletic experience to build upon. But I think what I learned in the pool was equally, if not more important in some ways, as it relates to being successful in the business world.
And speaking of that, I'm going to jump ahead just for a second, then we'll come back. When you're interviewing folks, we always talk about sort of those teamwork skills, right? Being able to work in a team, being a leader of a team, but also being a follower of a team sometimes, where you have to play different roles. Do you look for those kinds of, what do you look for in somebody when you're it depends on the job, I know, but some of those skills, I guess.
Yes, interviewing is a really interesting activity. It's really hard to figure out how good somebody is within 30 or 45 minutes of meeting them and asking them a few questions. I try to do 2 things when I interview folks. I try and figure out what they're uniquely qualified to do more than anyone else in the world as it relates to that job. And I try and figure out who likes to work with them and who doesn't like to work with them. So one of the things I always ask in an interview is, who hates to work with you? And it's the most off-putting question in the world. And I just did that out of the blue. I was meeting this person when I was at GoFundMe, and it was a really annoying person. And it just came out of my mouth, like, who hates working with you? Because I figured everyone hates working with them. And this person gave me a pretty good answer as it relates to what they were good at and what they were bad at, and who they can work with. And then the other question I like to ask is, what is your superpower? Like, why are you more qualified for this role than any other role? So I think those two questions, at least for me, help me figure out what a person is like outside of, the interview, the basic rote interview questions. And then the other thing I like to do is I like to do backdoor references on people. You can really you can learn much more about a person when you speak to people who they've worked with that they don't share as their references. So it's pretty easy to do that nowadays with LinkedIn and other sources. But to me, that's the most powerful thing to figure if somebody's good. When you speak to somebody that they don't give as a reference, you can find out everything about that person. And it's one of the most important things that I do. And it's an important lesson to, as you navigate your career, make sure everybody has something really good to say about you that you interact with, because it's going to happen all the time. This notion of referencing you based on who you've worked with, because it's easy to find out who you've worked with nowadays.
And there's so much more access to people, to your point, on LinkedIn, right? You can find the friends of friends. You can get a hold of
anything and everything.
Yeah. For better or for worse than that whole idea of things disappearing that they don't, but you all know that. That's fine. Okay, all right. So now you've gone through college. You played on this unbelievable team, made those kinds of friends as well. Okay, wait, I'm going back a second. How about history? How did you choose history as a major?
So I guess I chose it because I think I tried to major in something like political economy of industrial society.
PEIS.
Is that a thing still?
It's not a thing anymore,
Okay.
but there's one close to it, right? It's called anyway.
So PEIS was it was a really interesting major, and I didn't have good enough math or econ kind of grades to actually be accepted into the major. So history was this major that was easy to get accepted into. And what I found though is, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. And at least I use that as my line to my parents and anyone else who would listen to me. And a lot of people would say, how do you expect to get a job with a history major or social science degree of some sort? And I think the reality is, you just have to study what you're passionate about. And I think it unlocks a lot of different things. There's many different things you can study in history. There's business, there's economy, there's war, there's society. So for me, it was just a major that made sense in that it allowed me to get a pretty good view of a lot of different aspects of education.
All right, so then we've jumped forward to graduating, and I know we've got sort of a span of students in the class, but there's a lot of sort of the junior, senior kind of thing, thinking about, what they're gonna do next. So you're graduating, you're a history major, you're going out there looking for jobs. Yeah. What's the process?
So back then, and I think social, I think BA degrees are probably more accepted now, but back then in the late 80s, the economy was horrible. I had this history degree, and I was trying to break into things like investment banking and venture capital, and nobody would hire me. And back then, you didn't apply for a job on the internet. You had to write letters, and you had to make phone calls.
It sounds like 100 years ago.
It's only like 30-something years ago.
I know, but yeah.
I mean, we made it through all 4 years of school without anything. The internet, I guess it existed, but not for students. A few really bleeding edge kids had, the first Mac and could write their papers on a computer. But I used to go to the library and study, and we found information on this thing called microfilm. I don't know if that still exists, but if it does, it's very different than what happened when we were kids. But I sent out literally a few hundred letters to different companies trying to get a job, and I couldn't get a job anywhere. It was probably a mixture of economy and this history degree, even though it was from the storied university. I just didn't find a job at all. It was really, really, really hard.
And so, so you're in that spot, and your parents are probably saying you should probably get a job, and you kind of, I don't know, did you create one for yourself? What'd you do?
So I did get a job for a little while at a German transportation company that shipped containerized freight around the world, and it was a horrible job. I thought it would be interesting to work in international business, but it was horrible. So I quit that job, and I really wanted to do something that was related to what was happening in Silicon Valley. And I figured out that, I doing in terms of coding or engineering or any of the things that were driving Silicon Valley. But there was something happening that was pretty cool. The video game industry was starting to just explode at the end of the 80s and early 90s. And I was dying to get into that industry, and I couldn't, again, I couldn't find a job in any of the real companies that were doing things. And there was this tiny little startup that was headquartered on Brandon Street in San Francisco. They called it the Multimedia Gulch back then, or it was beginning to be called that. And there was a company called Modern Media Ventures. It had 4 employees, and they were creating a CD-ROM. I don't even know if anyone knows what that is, but that's how video games used to be delivered. They were delivered on these compact discs that had all sorts of cool graphics, music, and video on them. So I begged this little company to give me a job, and said, "What can you do for us?" And I said, "I'll do anything you tell me to do." And they hired me, and it was a job. I graduated from Berkeley, and I was making like $6 or $7 an hour at Modern Media Ventures. And they were trying to bring to market a product called Gus Goes to Cybertown. So I was just a kind of a lackey there doing whatever they needed. I wrote the manual for the game. I took screenshots of the game in order to promote the game. I would get them coffee. It was really fun, but it was just the lowest of the low kind of job that you could imagine.
Can everybody hear Rob okay in the back? Is the microphones all right? Okay, good. Just want to make sure. So it's this, you're a gopher at this job, essentially, right? But did you like it? Like, what was it like for you there?
Yeah, it was amazing. I was learning about this new industry, and it was pretty bleeding edge then. There weren't that many companies creating content and video games that were. There were a handful of startups. There weren't a ton of them. And it was kind of the best place in the world to be at the time because I knew nothing about the industry. I was learning about it every day. I was able to fake it till you make it. I was able to fake that I was in the video game industry as I started getting interviews at other companies. So it really made a huge difference as it relates to, I think, the whole trajectory of my career. I mean, it was very accidental that I ended up there, but not for that role at this little tiny Modern Media Ventures, which I think it blew up pretty quickly after I was there. But it kind of set me on the course of being very focused on this intersection of consumers and technology.
And so, and that's what, I mean, that in and of itself is kind of a cool story of different ways to get into your career, right? You can go, some people graduate and get the investment banking job or get the job at EA Sports or whatever. And, but this is one where those weren't available. So to point the side door, housing away to get in.
So I had to, I wanted to be in this industry so desperately, and without any experience, I had to just find a way into it. So I think the lesson to learn there is there are many different paths, right? I mean, there's on-campus recruiting, and there's amazing companies, I'm sure, like Microsoft and Google and Snowflake, and you name it. I'm sure there's a ton of great companies that come on campus to recruit the best and the brightest. And oftentimes, you just have to find your own way. If that isn't exactly what you want to do, is there a machine learning or artificial intelligence company that is just fascinating, and do you want to work there? And sometimes you just have to hound the founder or people who work there and just figure out a way in. And I think there's many different paths to follow. It's not always prescriptive. I always recommend reading this book called The Alchemist. I think it's the top selling book in the world. I think they've sold 60 or 80 million copies, but it's this amazing fable about, finding your path. And I think everyone has their own path. And, there's always a different path depending on what you want to do and what you want to be.
And being creative on how to find it. And it's so much easier to get creative on it too, because you can go on LinkedIn and start, I'm a big LinkedIn fan on that. Yeah. It's a great way to network. It's a great way to find people who are working wherever you want to be, or somebody you like, and you see where they've worked in places you haven't even heard before, and you might be able to get in that way too. Okay, so then from there, we're going to catapult a little bit, and you can take us back, to, any of you, if you want to, as we go back. But I'm going to jump all the way. So then you go to EA. Actually, tell me how you got from that to EA.
Yeah, so EA was the biggest. It was called Electronic Arts back then. It was one of the more important technology IPOs back in I think it was probably the late 80s or early 90s. At the time, it was the largest video game company in the world. So I had this gopher job at Modern Media Ventures, which was a very unimportant company. And it allowed me to get an interview at EA, and I got my first big job in tech was as a video game tester and a customer service rep. So the only way to get into electronic arts was to do that. So there would be people who were JDs, MBAs, people who could design video games, but they wouldn't hire you into electronic arts unless you knew how to talk to the customer. So my first big job in tech after Modern Media Ventures was video game tester, customer service reps. You test the games for like 6 weeks, and you'd understand the games, and then you'd sit on the phones and answer calls from rabid, crazy gamers, and they're all crazy men at the time. There weren't too many women gamers, which has changed pretty dramatically. But you would get these people calling into you, and they were addicted to these games, and they would yell and scream at you when these games had bugs. And back then, this was packaged goods software. You couldn't fix the games over the internet. They came in CD-ROMs or they came in cartridges, and software is always broken and buggy, and you were at the mercy of these rabid fans. And that was my first big job in tech. And again, it was a very, very entry-level position that taught me a lot about how important it is to serve your customer. That's probably the most important thing, no matter what industry you get into.
All right, from you leapfrog to Yahoo as that sort of takes off, and then from Yahoo you go to why am I blanking on it? What's the next one after Yahoo?
Oh, Sidestep, the travel
Sidestep.
company.
And then you end up at and then Groupon. You took that from like 5 people to 5,000 people or somewhere along that way. Okay, so let's just jump all the way ahead to GoFundMe. And this is one of my favorite stories of yours is, so here he is running GoFundMe, right? And what's the most important thing when you're running a company? I mean, yes, it's important, employee happiness and everything, but before you get to all of that, you need a revenue stream to run a company, right? And you make a suggestion on sort of changing the fundamental part of that. So just walk us through how all that happened and what you did.
Okay, so I joined GoFundMe as the CEO, and we had a very sensible business model. We would help people raise money when they needed access to capital. We became kind of the social safety net on the internet, where when people couldn't pay for their insurance or their house burned down and they needed to rebuild or they wanted to raise money for a cause, we became kind of ubiquitous as this place to come to do that. And we would keep 5% of all funds raised, which seems pretty reasonable, right? I mean, you raise $100 on GoFundMe, or you raise $10,000 on GoFundMe, the platform that helped enable that needs to generate revenue, and we would keep 5% of all the funds raised. But it turns out that there were a bunch of little competitors who wanted to take market share from us, and they came to market with a free model where they would offer the fundraising platform for free, and they were starting to take a little bit of market share from us, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And then as GoFundMe started becoming a thing, we became part of the zeitgeist. There would be some really big fundraising campaigns that were related to some pretty interesting or even horrific events. So I remember distinctly when the horrific shooting happened in Vegas, we raised, I think, $50 or $20 million for the families of the victims. And everyone started writing in, hey, GoFundMe, you have to waive the fees. All this money should go to the victims. And we didn't disagree with that. But we were very religious about our business model. We always kept the 5%. Because imagine the slippery slope when you waive the fee on one campaign, but there's another campaign that's equally as interesting or heartstring pulling. So we started losing the war of public opinion. A lot of people were beating us up, even though you could argue that it was the most fair thing in the world to keep the 5%. We were starting to get beaten up really badly in the media, and we had this community of, at the time, it was probably 25 or 30 million people who had made donations, and they started asking us to constantly waive the fees. And I went to the board of directors and I said to them, we have to change our business model. And they couldn't disagree more. They said, hey, it's very fair. You do so much work for these campaigners. The 5% makes sense. And I kept arguing with them, and I kept running tests to show them that we were losing market share and we had to do something about it. And for 6 months, I had this ridiculous argument with them. My entire management team realized in the trenches that we had to change our business model, and the board just wouldn't let us. And as a CEO, you report to the board of directors. And I got to the point finally where I said, I'm changing the business model, and it's going to happen on December 1st and I think this was 2017. And they said, no, you're not. And I said, yes, I am. And they said, no, you're not. And they said, we want you to test it for 6 to 12 months to make sure that your recommendation is viable. And the recommendation was to offer the platform for free. We were going to give the platform away for free and no longer keep 5% from the funds raised. We were going to switch it to a model where we asked the donors to leave a voluntary tip for the platform. Hopefully they would leave a tip behind. And we learned that this was a pretty viable alternative, but the board didn't understand that that might be viable, and they just didn't really want us to do it. So I finally got.
And it was your only revenue stream, right?
It was the only revenue stream.
I mean, like, it's not like you're just checking out over here. You're saying the revenue stream that runs the company.
We were raising a few $1 billion a year, and it was a really good business because it didn't require thousands of people. We had a few hundred people. Very profitable business, and the board loved it. Everyone loved it, and we were growing nicely, but we were losing market share. And then Facebook entered the market and offered a different model where they were going to really be competitive with us. So I got to the point where I said to the board, I'm launching this new model on, I think it was a Sunday night. On Monday morning when you come to the site, you're going to see a new GoFundMe where we don't charge the 5%. And they said, no, you're not. And I hung up this call. I was over in Dublin, Ireland, because I was over there doing some business, launching our European presence. And I thought they were going to fire me. I literally thought that they would not allow us to do that. But I hung up from this board call. I said to the engineering team, you have to roll this thing out. We're ready to go. And I thought for sure I wasn't going to have a job on that Monday morning. But we rolled it out. And this is kind of fascinating. The 5% became something like 5.78%. That's when we rolled it out for free, people felt really good about this new business model, and it allowed us to get rid of that public opinion of GoFundMe of being greedy and not getting the funds to the causes that need them. And then every competitor that was nipping at our ankles that was causing trouble kind of went away. We acquired like 2 or 3 of them, and the rest of them kind of died out. So, it was one of these Cuban Missile Crisis-like moments where I had to, I think the board thought I was going to blink and not roll this out, but I knew based on what I understood about the business and our customers and the market that we had to make this change. So once in a while, when you have deep conviction about something, the lesson learned there is you have to follow that conviction, even if it's very unpopular. And in this case, I was willing to lose the job over it because I knew it was the right thing to do.
And we talk a lot about, it's Cal, right? We've got these pillars that we talk about, and question the status quo is one of those pillars. And it's just a perfect example of that, because you go into it and everybody has this is how it's always been done. Right, the board has a responsibility, right, and is saying we can't give up our revenue, which I get that part.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I get that part. But had you not questioned the status quo, your theory is perhaps GoFundMe may have been.
We would have survived it, but we would have been neutered, hampered. We would have been much less powerful a force in the world. We would have had multiple competitors. I think we probably would have lost 40-50% of our market share over time. It just, you can see the trend, and you have to fight. You have to fight the status quo when things aren't going in the right direction, or if you have deep conviction about a new way to do something.
Yeah, and it does feel better, right? Probably for you, and certainly the people donating the money. I'm just shocked it happened. Has that stayed steady? That 5.7? Has it?
It's been 5 years now, kind of like pancake flat.
Really?
Yeah, everyone thought, the board thought it would probably go down to like 2 or 3% of an effective take rate after, if we were relying on the generosity of the donors. But from the day we launched it to this day, it's always been over 5%, almost 6%, and it's literally from the day we launched and for the next year or two, it was always flat, and we'd see a blip here or there, but I think it's in the same range. So
yeah. Okay, so one of the things I think is interesting is that here you were interested in video games and that kind of thing to start, and then I don't know if all of you saw this, but he was named one of Time Magazine's most influential people in healthcare, right?
Healthcare, yeah.
Healthcare, like not in tech, not in this, because GoFundMe.
Yeah, so our number one category is medical related expenses. So we became an accidental insurer. If you think about people who don't have access to insurance and health benefits, it became our largest category by far. And I was just shocked. I mean, I don't really know anything about healthcare other than it's really expensive. And in this country, we do a pretty lousy job of making sure enough people are covered with the right benefits. And this platform that we created that exists to help and need help became a de facto insurer. And I guess the world started seeing that, and we're probably at a point now where I don't know, $2 billion a year or more is raised for medical related expenses. So yes, accidental insurer got me on this list of Times 50 most influential people in the healthcare industry, and I've never been, nor have I ever desired to be in the healthcare business. But sometimes you find yourself in these interesting circumstances by virtue of what you're doing.
Favorite job you've had?
Favorite job, Yahoo for sure. So you guys don't know this, but Yahoo was the coolest company in the world for a little while. It really was.
And when it first when it first started, we all thought it was Yahoo. We thought it was the chocolate milk. Like it was unclear. Yeah, Yahoo, whatever that was. Yeah.
But Yahoo is this pretty interesting phenomenon that happened at the right time. So there was this walled garden dial-up internet service called America Online, which is a big, powerful company. They actually acquired Time Warner, big media company back in the old days, and that got on it was unwound after a while. And then Yahoo comes along, and we are the portal to the internet. We were providing access to the information superhighway, whatever you wanted to call it back in the old days. But it was we created the blueprint for what it meant to be a multinational global internet company, and we made it up as we went. So the reason it was my favorite job was nothing like this had ever existed. And I guess you could maybe argue the Web3 blockchain smart contract universe is a little bit like that, but not exactly, but not for Yahoo and Google and some of these other things. You don't have Web3. But Yahoo was this thing that just, I think, blew people away. You can get your sports scores, and you could track your stocks, and you can get your news, and it was instantly accessible, and you could buy things. And what was so great about it, at least for me, was the fact that we were inventing a new way to introduce content and commerce and community to people, and it never existed at a global scale before. I wrote this article for a woman named Kara Swisher, who's a pretty amazing journalist, and I called her up one day. I happened to know her from the old days. I said, you should write a story about all the people at Yahoo and where they went, because they went and a couple of them created WhatsApp, and some of them were the management team at Airbnb, and others went to famous venture capital firms and funded some of the best companies in the world. And she said, no, I don't want to write that. You should write it because you were there. So I wrote this article. It's called Yahoo, the GE of the internet. I think if you Google it, you can find it. And what was pretty fascinating is when you look at Yahoo and then the diaspora of people who worked there over the last 10, 20 years, they really have gone on to run and lead some of the most important internet and technology companies in the world. And I feel really, really fortunate to have learned there. I wasn't smart enough to get an MBA, or I couldn't get into business school. I feel like it did more for me than an MBA could have. So once in a while, you find a company that is inventing a new technology or a new paradigm. And if you are lucky enough to get to one of those, get into that and hold on for dear life and experience it, because it does change everything, because you get to see things that nobody else really gets to see when you're on the inside. So by far the most fun job I've ever had was Yahoo.
And how did you get that job?
So Yahoo was a media company, and they wanted to get into commerce. And back in the old days of the internet, Amazon and eBay were kind of the only commerce players out there. And Yahoo said, wait a minute, we have more audience than anyone. We need to play in the commerce game, and they didn't know how to do it. And I was working at a small little internet company that was involved in selling products on the internet. So I was one of the few people in the world at the time that knew how to sell things on the internet back in, I guess, like 1996 or 97. There weren't too many of us. And I just got recruited to go work at Yahoo, and they were hiring somebody to be the director of product management. And I was a product manager, so I said, wait a minute, Yahoo's kind of cool. It would be kind of fun to go there and figure out how to get into the commerce game. And it was really frustrating because they wanted to be in the commerce game, but they didn't know how to do it. And they they said, go figure it out. And they gave me like 10 or 15 engineers and a couple of product people. And we had the times of our lives just trying to figure out how to get this media company and transition a portion of it into becoming a seller of products on the internet. So that was one of the best jobs I've ever had for sure.
Very cool. And you know, those jobs are the next round of that's out there, right? It's happening now.
Yeah,
and
I think you could argue that a lot of this Web3 phenomena is where these new jobs that haven't actually been invented or created yet are happening. I think there's interesting things happening in AI that I guess a lot of people would argue AI has been around for a while, but I think the renaissance of what's going to be possible with artificial intelligence is just starting to happen. I think there's just so many things happening in technology, and you know, you just have to be brave and willing to go to the unknown if that's kind of what you desire. There's always a lot of new things, but you know, I think everything is derivative of everything. So you know, I think we can kind of see what's going to make sense, but we don't know which companies are going to be the ones that break through. So in this Web3 universe, it's a Wild West total mess, just like the original Web 1.0 was, where none of the companies that were the biggest potential companies exist, with the exception of Amazon and eBay, and you know, poor Yahoo is a shell of its former self. I think some Verizon maybe owns it now, or some private equity firm. So you never know what's possible.
Yeah, I remember being on the news, and there was an event going on, and they had a website, and it was the first time. I mean, you know, and I had the name of the website down, and I was live, you know, and I'm announcing it, and I'm like, and if you want more information, you can go to https// like, right? Because I had no idea. I didn't know what it was exactly, but I just remember that moment of sort of thinking, you know, yeah, how things have changed. All right, so we do want to open it up to questions from students. We've already got a hand up here near the front, so we'll do that and see what they have for you.
Awesome.
Okay.
This is the fun part.
Oh, the other, besides question the status quo, is student always?
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and you are making great things. My question is about what you think about universal basic income. Maybe you know that Switzerland planned to adopt this universal basic income for all the citizens. What you are thinking about this? How it's important for other countries? Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? I had a hard time hearing it.
Yeah, so I think the question is, what do I think, or what do we think of universal basic income, which is being instituted in
Switzerland?
Yeah, I'm not a great student of that concept. I've read about it, seen a little bit of it out there. There are studies that show when you make a universal basic income available to people, it really changes things, especially for those who don't have access to income. So I would argue that it makes sense. I think a lot of my friends who are libertarians in Silicon Valley would argue against it, but I don't know. I think I'm a little bit more of a big government person than others out there. So I'm a huge fan of it. I think anything you could do to help people who need the help is a good thing to do, as long as you do it within some kind of bounds and guidelines and reason, and you know, are tracking the progress of it. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. And I think it would be really hard to do here in this country right now, just based on how much ridiculous spending is going on across many different parts of government. But I would much rather see that than some of the wasted spending that we're doing. I think you know, education is too expensive here. Healthcare is too expensive here. It's really hard for a lot of people to make a living. So I think UBI is a great idea.
Well, and there's that whole concept that we've talked about, like you talk about going to find your passion. It's hard to find your passion if you don't have food on the table and a roof over your head, right? So if you can provide that, sort of those basics, it's a lot easier to go find what that is, right?
So.
I mean, otherwise, yeah, a little harder. Okay, question up here.
Actually, I'm hoping that Rishi will ask a question, because I wanted to thank, on behalf of all of us, Rishi for being a student coordinator for how many semesters?
5, 6, so yeah.
Maybe 5 semesters, one
Forever.
when he's not even a student. So it's very bittersweet. I'm excited for what you're doing, but ask a good question now.
Anyway, thank you for all you've done.
Thank you for joining us here today. So I guess my question for you, Rob, here is that, so earlier in your career, you mentioned you had some experience in sales, and obviously to be a great CEO, you're always selling yourself to the board, to your shareholders, to customers. And so how do you think you kind of grew the sales skill set from early in your career till now? And where are you kind of taking it from there?
So the one big mistake I actually made is I never had a sales job. I think I'm pretty good at selling. I think the most important thing is learning how to sell, no matter what your role or responsibility is, whether you're an engineer or a product manager or a marketer or in sales. You're always selling yourself, whether it's in an interview, whether you're trying to win a contract. I never was formally trained in sales, and I think it would have made a huge difference. So I think one bit of advice I'd give to everyone is, if you can get a little bit of sales experience or a lot of sales experience, do it. It makes a huge difference. Actually, I lied. I did have a sales internship one summer. I got a job at this, I don't know, does Merrill Lynch exist? Maybe it does. It was a stock brokerage, and some hotshot stockbroker gave me a summer job, and he gave me the Yellow Pages, which is a big book that lists every business in a geography. And he said, call every small business in San Francisco and sell them on a checking account, which was very innovative at the time. It was a working capital management account, which was an interest-bearing checking account for businesses. And it was brutal. I mean, you're just see a business, you call them up and say, hey, I have this thing. Oh, they all hung up. So I had a little tiny bit of sales experience, but I was never trained in sales. And I wish to God I had some of that training. I think it makes a huge difference in no matter what role or responsibility you have at a company or at a startup. Like if you start a company, you're selling to everyone. You're selling to your prospective employees. You're selling to partners. You're selling all day long. So it's probably the most important immutable skill set to have in almost any career, I'd argue. It's a great question.
I'm curious what you think is critical to a good sell. Like what skill is important in selling?
In selling? Selling. No, I think the story, right? I think storytelling is another. I mean, you're an expert storyteller, and you know how important it is. I think being able to tell the story of what you're selling, why you're selling it. I think the storytelling components of selling are critical. And then I guess closing. I wish I was an expert at selling, but I think the closing is really hard to do. And if you can't get to the close, you can't sell. So to me, that's probably the most important thing.
Hi, I would actually like to say I think you're a great storyteller, and so thank you for sharing your story today. My first question is, I have two, but what are some influential books that you've read that you'd like to share with us? And also, how did you start investing in the companies that you are invested in today?
Okay. So the best business book in the whole world is a book by Mario Puzo. Mario Puzo wrote The Godfather. So I'm serious, if you read The Godfather as a business book, it'll teach you everything you need to know about business. It's a little bit cutthroat, but it's true. Somebody told me this once, and I forget who it was, but this person said, don't watch the movie The Godfather, read Puzo's book and read it as a business primer. It's a pretty great business book in some ways. It's somewhat flippant of an answer, but it's
Besides
true.
actually cutting people's
Yeah,
throats.
you don't want to leave a horse head in somebody's bed if you don't like them. But it's very interesting. There's another book that I thought was an amazing book. I think it's called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing or Truth Marketing. These two gentlemen, Trout and Rise, wrote the book, and it gives you everything you need to know about marketing. And then the question about angel investing, I think I fell into it a little bit accidentally. I worked with a guy at Yahoo who went to become a venture capitalist at a really great firm. It's called Excel Partners. And one of his very first investments was in a company called TinySpec. And TinySpec was going to be a video game company. And they were marketing a video game called Glitch. And Glitch was going to be a massively multiplayer online game, but it was not a shoot-up kind of game and not a strategy game. It was kind of this beautiful graphical universe. And there was a group of folks in San Francisco and a group of folks in Vancouver building Glitch, the game. Type in Glitch, the video game, and you'll see these beautiful pictures. So Glitch was a video game that failed miserably. And the guys who were building the game built a way to communicate between the San Francisco and Vancouver offices. And when the video game failed, the investors, there's a little bit of money left over, and they said, hey, wait a minute, you guys return the money to us. We said, don't return the money to us. Keep building that communication tool that you built. And what they built was this thing called Slack. Do you guys use Slack at school?
I've heard of it.
An amazing, amazing software platform.
It's
but
the
it was,
fastest growing enterprise software ever.
yeah, a total accident, right? I mean, it's a very interesting story. That the guy Stuart Butterfield, who created Slack, created a game prior to this in the old days, and it became a photo sharing application that Yahoo acquired. So the network of Yahoo got me into angel investing. Stuart needed money for this video game. I had some video game experience, and I invested in a company. And my first angel investment was a huge failure, but then it actually turned into a gigantic success. So I think angel investing is a great thing to do, but for me it's just an accidental kind of sport or hobby. But I got super lucky with Slack, and anyone tells you who was an early investor in Slack or invested in what was going to be the fastest growing enterprise software company in the world, they're total liars. And there are people who will tell you that they knew that, but they're full of shit. They and a lot of venture capitalists make stuff up because it's one of the only industries where you fail about 70% of the time, and you can still be a legendary investor just by hitting it on the 1 or 2 or 3 investments out of 10 that make it. So it's a very interesting industry.
Couple of my hand up right here in the front. Yep.
I'm actually going to give you this so we can all hear. I'm sorry.
Hi, I go to church. My father's an Esquire, and I live in the UC Berkeley student co-op, Casa Zimbabwe, and I want to open up a co-op youth hostel, and I want to call it Mermaid House. And my bar of gold to open up the co-op youth hostel is this. I'm almost in the Guinness Book of World Records for this. Every day I've drawn the best thing that's happened to me, now for 27 years. And so my question to you, coming from me, an artist that goes to church and lived in the UCB co-op system, is my bar of gold is the art, and the distinction of having applied to the Guinness Book of World Records for this, which is 27 years, every day I draw the best thing that happened to me on my calendar.
So
and your question for
my question is, what does an artist do? Here are my bars of gold. I want to open a youth hostel based on the green plan, horizontal management style, and I want to sell the beds at $10 a night here on Telegraph Avenue.
I love it.
Thank you.
That's a tough question. But what's really interesting is when you look at the blockchain, smart contract, Web3 universe, they have these things called distributed autonomous organizations, DAOs. Artists are crushing it in the brave new world of what's possible in the Web3 universe. So, there are opportunities that never existed for creators. Creators have been beholden to distribution platforms like Spotify, like YouTube, and they get a tiny bit of money when their content is viewed or interacted with, and that's changing. I mean, if you're an artist, if you're a creator, the next generation of possibility is just wild. You can control your destiny a lot more than an artist in the pre-internet days could, in the post-internet days could. In the future, artists will be able to, generate and hold on to the lion's share of revenue that is created by their art based on the new technologies that are coming. So it's a very interesting new way to do things, but it's a brand new world, and you have to figure out how to distribute your smart contracts and get on the blockchain and take your art to the world. And what's really interesting is everyone who's part of your community is an owner of whatever you create now, which is pretty interesting and different than anything we've seen before. So that's part of this brave new world that is different than what has come before us as the internet's, I don't know, what is it, 25 years old as a commercial entity. It's really changing pretty dramatically.
It is pretty cool what blockchain is doing and authenticating art and everything else. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And content in general. Okay, any other questions? We have a few others here. Yep, right up here is one, and let's see.
Did you see one in the back? I didn't see it.
I think so.
Yeah,
Okay.
but slightly different. I remember Groupon received a $6 billion offer from Google. Why do you think Groupon didn't sell? And also looking back now, do you think it was a bad idea?
It it was a terrible idea not to sell, and I left the company over it. Greed got in the way. So, Groupon was a very interesting company. It was the fastest growing company in the history of companies back in 2010, 2011. We raised wild amounts of money. I think we raised $1 billion, which back then was a phenomenal amount of money. We were creating a new paradigm that wasn't all that new, but a lot of people believed it was. We were helping small businesses sell their product before people consumed it, which is pretty novel, but not incredibly novel. I mean, there were coupon books in the old days, but we were doing it at scale and using technology. A bunch of investment bankers descended upon Chicago, which is where Groupon was headquartered, and told us, you're going to be a 25, 30, 40, $50 billion company. And we had no real technology. We had the most amazing sales team assembled, probably in the history of sales teams. We hired 7,000 people in 9 months to sell to small businesses. So we were a little bit of a technology company and a gigantic sales and marketing company. And when Google approached us, I thought it was the greatest thing in the world because, best sales machine in the world, meeting the best technology company in the world. You put that together and you probably end up creating the operating system for small business. And that could have been, incredibly powerful. But we got caught up in the hubris of, we're so great, we're going to be so valuable, we'll build our own technology. And if you flash forward, I don't know, I guess 10 years now, I think it's a public company that's worth $1 billion, if that. We should have sold for the $6 billion for sure. And it would have, I think, created the operating system for small businesses. And that still hasn't happened yet. It's really interesting. If you think about in any of the local cafes, restaurants, hair salons, massage studios around here, for the most part, they're never at capacity except for the really great ones. And if you could match up supply and demand and help these businesses just get 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 extra customers a day, it changes everything for the small business. And I thought we should have done that. So when I said we should take the offer, the founder of the company and the investors said, "Oh, you're a wimp, you're giving up." And I kind of knew we couldn't build what they wanted to build. We were just a great sales team. So that got me kind of sideways with the board. And in that example, I lost and I had to go. But it was the adventure of a lifetime. I mean, it's very rare that you get to see that kind of scale happening in real time. And it was an amazing adventure. And I would do it all over again. I just wish we had sold to Google. I think it would have been a much different story. And I think it would have created a more special platform for small businesses. To this day still hasn't been created. So there's an interesting opportunity to figure out yield management and all those things for small businesses. Still hasn't been figured out at all with all this amazing technology that we have floating around.
Hello. So I'm an international student, and I've grown up surrounded by people who've worked in the same company for decades. So I'm wondering what benefits or drawbacks you got from switching through so many jobs and so many companies.
I was running from the law the whole time. I had to get out. I think loyalty is a very important quality, but I'm not sure it's rewarded anymore, at least in this market. I think there are certain markets where it does make sense to stay in a company for a long time. But I find, I went to GoFundMe and I made this epic mistake. I think in my very first set of meetings as we were building the company, I said, I want this to be your last job. I want this to be the greatest place you've ever worked so that it's your last job. And that's just not, that's kind of a fantasy. I think what we all have to realize is, you should go to companies and do the best work of your life if you can, if you're lucky that you're able to do that. And then oftentimes, I think the opportunities that exist in those companies aren't necessarily the right ones for you. And you oftentimes just have to leave in order to find the next opportunity and the next opportunity. My mom had this saying for all the kids. We had 5 kids in the family, and she would always cry if a kid left the roost. But she said that this family exists to create roots to grow with and wings to fly with. And I think that holds true to these companies that you go work at. Hopefully, you can learn a lot. You can be a big part of the success. But when it's time to fly, you got to go and figure out how to progress your career. So I think a company isn't as loyal to the employee as it used to be, and I don't think you need to be as loyal to the company. You should, while you're there, do great work, and hopefully you're rewarded for that. But if the opportunities that you need aren't there, you have to look elsewhere. I would argue that that's the pragmatic thing to do, and I think other people would, make an argument that you should be loyal to the company that's paying you and paying your benefits. And I think the only thing you really owe these companies is doing great work while you're there and gaining great experience. And if you can leverage that experience to keep moving up in that company, hallelujah. Stay there as long as you're happy. But I don't think that's a reality anymore. I think it's more important to figure out, where you can continue to grow and do great work. I mean, a funny story along that vein is I had this engineer who was amazing, and he came to me one day after 2.5 years at the company, and he said, I have this offer to go work at WhatsApp, which was owned by Facebook at the time. And I said, oh, you shouldn't go there. Facebook's a horrible place. And I was just trying to, argue with why he should stay. And he showed me the offer, and it was literally like this package that was going to pay him, I don't know, like $1.2 million a year just to go work, a combination of salary and restricted stock units. And the most I could pay him was maybe a third of that. And I just hugged the guy and I said, hallelujah, congratulations. I'm glad you did your work here, but I'm not even a counter offer. I can't compete with that. If that's what you want to do, you have to go do it. I think companies are structured now, especially in Silicon Valley, they're very transitional and transactional right now. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. But it's probably a really good thing for employees, not so good for the company, because the company makes a lot of investment in you, and you only stay there for years. The company can't really get the most out of you, but the right thing to do is to do what's right for you.
I agree. Other questions? We've got a question right here. Okay, there and over here as well. Okay, great. Yep.
Thank you so much for being there. I wondered, like, sometimes when you go on crowdfunding platforms such as GoFundMe, you are often like you're often like afraid of giving money because you can think that it's a scam.
Yeah.
A lot of crowdfunding platforms are kind of blamed for their lack of transparency. So my first question is, what does GoFundMe do for this lack of transparency? And the second one is, have you ever thought about blockchain?
Thought about?
Blockchain.
Blockchain. I think about blockchain all the time. I just wish I understood it. So when I got to GoFundMe in 2015, we were starting to grow. It wasn't a ubiquitous platform that everyone had heard of, and there were a ton of fraudsters on the platform who were doing bad things. And I went to the board and I said, we have to guarantee every donation on this platform, and if you make a donation and you don't feel good about it, I want to refund your money. And they said, you can't do that. You're crazy. And they said, okay, if you want to do that, go get insurance. So I went and met with Lloyd's of London and the biggest insurance companies in the world, and they laughed me out of their room. We will not insure that. You have to be self-insured. And then we decided we had to offer something called the GoFundMe guarantee. And in order to do that, we had to build a very sophisticated trust and safety system. So we hired the best and brightest other platforms that had built trust and safety systems. We built a bunch of technology, and ultimately we rolled out this thing called the GoFundMe guarantee. Another example where the board thought I was insane, and I said, in order to build what we have to build here, we have to be the most trusted platform, and people have to trust where the money is going and how the money is used. So we just invested in building out the system and platform to police everything. And that being said, whether it's eBay or Visa or you name the platform, there's fraud everywhere. And what you're trying to do is just minimize it as much as possible. And that's what we did. And it turned out that the refunds that we had to suffer as a business were pretty small. We got really good at it. We had to get good at it. And less than 1/10% of campaigns resulted in any kind of fraud. And we were able to budget a few $1 million a year to service that fraud. So that was the big thing that we thought about. And then on the blockchain question, I think there's a lot of hype around Web3 and blockchain and smart contracts and cryptocurrencies, and a lot of fraud and a lot of stuff that's going to be disastrous. But you can't argue it is very important and critical, and it's going to be a big part of the future. So I think blockchain is critical, important, something that you guys should all get to understand better. If you get a chance to work at a great company that's doing it well, there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot of startups that are trying to become the next big thing in blockchain, and they're almost all going to fail miserably because there isn't that much bandwidth for too many of these companies to be successful. But a company that we've never heard of is going to be as big, if not bigger, than Google, and it may be being formed at Berkeley here right now. That you just don't know, but I do think it's it's a fundamentally critically important component of the evolution of tech, and it's going to be really big. Nothing profound there, other than I think it's worth exploring, and if there are companies that are doing this that aren't pure startup that are making some headway in the space, great place to go learn, and then go build your startup. Because I don't think most of us know enough about it. I think there are some brilliant folks who know a lot about it, and there's a bunch of hucksters out there who know nothing, and they're just trying to exploit what's going on out there. So caveat emptor in the blockchain world, but I do think it's fascinating, important, and amazing companies will be built upon smart contracts and everything that is associated with that whole universe.
Question over here.
Time for about 2 more questions, 3 more questions.
There's 2 here.
Yeah, these folks have been waiting for a while. So, okay.
Hi. So I was pretty impressed by your story of how you pushed for the new revenue model for GoFundMe. I wonder, how do you know when you need to go for, when it comes to a critical decision, how do you know if you go for, whether you should go for a compromise or when you need to stand your ground?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's hard to know. In the case of the example that I shared with you, when you live it and breathe it every day as an executive team, as an operating team, you really understand, if you're in touch and in tune with your users and you're listening to feedback, you know what works and what doesn't work. So I think getting feedback from your users, your customers is critical. We ran some tests. We had no idea whether it would work or not. We had one board member who was supportive of the change. There's a famous actor named Edward Norton of Fight Club fame. He was on our board of directors. And he wasn't on the board because he was a pretty face or an actor. He actually was an entrepreneur who created a competitor to GoFundMe, and we acquired his company. He's a pretty smart guy and a really good entrepreneur, and they employed a similar model, not the exact free model, but he knew from the model that they employed that this could probably work. And he was the only person around the board table in solidarity with this change. And I think when you have deep conviction, when you know the market, when you know your customers, you have to take risks. And that's how great things happen. Uber was a joke around Silicon Valley back in 2007, 8, 9. Everyone laughed, like, nobody's going to get in this stranger's car and drive around with them. I think you just have to have a keen insight and understanding and deep conviction. And when you have that, you go for it. Oftentimes you'll be wrong, but at least you have that deep conviction. I think that's the most important thing is doing enough work to understand the market and having a point of view. And oftentimes you'll be wrong, but when you're right, it changes everything. So I think it's a matter of just studying, understanding, questioning everything from every angle, and then getting to an answer. And you could just analyze and fall victim to analysis paralysis, which a lot of people in businesses do. And that's how innovation dies, and that's how companies die. So I think it's important to constantly questioning and pushing forward and trying new things. And that's how innovation happens, and that's how breakthroughs happen, and that's how you beat off the competition.
All right, and one more question. Wait, first, I've got to give it to this gentleman right here because I can't. So you stand up
He's
first.
frantically waving.
Exactly.
Oh,
yes.
Sorry, thank you. So it's actually related but different question, which is you've mentioned a few instances where there's been a strategic decision and some friction with board members. And I wonder whether it be a GoFundMe or a previous company, what proportion of your time has been spent on operating versus stakeholder management, crisis management, and how has that evolved as companies have grown?
That's a really good question because, one of the things that killed Yahoo, I think, was this rather than focusing externally and competing and focusing on what was happening in the outside markets, we got caught up in internal turf battles, and the big management team that ran Yahoo wanted to meet with every product group and make decisions on what products they were launching. And it just, I think it got, I quit Yahoo in 2005, and it was a very unpopular time to quit. You know, the company was booming and the stock was zooming, and it was kind of, there weren't that many great companies and jobs out there at the time. Next wave was coming. And it was just so stifling that I had to quit because we were not focused on what really mattered, which was, you know, the competitive dynamic and innovating. And I think it got to the point where I was managing the stakeholders and all the stuff you just asked about, like 50 to 70% of the time versus running the business. You know, so I think managing up is a very important thing to do. And at GoFundMe, when I was having my little board strife, probably like 30 to 40% management of the board versus the business. And that's how companies die as well, when you're not on what's important. So it's really important to compartmentalize and spend X percent of your time. You'll always have to deal with internal stakeholders and board members and internal constituents that, you know, they don't matter, but they really do matter because you have to manage them. But I would say if you can get to a perfect 90-10 where you're focused externally, it's the right model. I think it's nearly impossible to get there. I think most people probably, even when they're really good at this, are 70-30, but I think you have to keep constantly pushing and figuring out what's important. And internal stakeholder management is important, but it also gets in the way of operating and innovating and all of those things. So I don't know. I think different people would have a different answer to that question. I think the conventional wisdom would suggest 75-25, but I think almost all of that time spent is wasted versus what you could be doing if you were focused on the market and the competition and innovation and things that really matter. So, I mean, that's the most important question probably of the night. Just how do you figure out how to focus on the important versus getting bogged down in things that don't move, that don't matter, that don't move the needle.
All right, and last question. Where's the person? Yep, there you go.
Hi, Rob. Hi, Diane. Thanks so much for such a spectacular last night. I really wanted to take the time to appreciate your time tonight, Victoria, for, you know, the time settling down. On behalf of students, just thank you for this program. Thank you for gathering so many amazing speakers. And to you, Rob, my question is, what characteristic about yourself do you attribute your evolution from, you know, out of college coffee runner to CEO of GoFundMe?
It's easy. Brilliance. No, not brilliant.
and being humble at the same time.
No.
Yeah.
It's luck. And I think I had a really interesting argument with a woman who I worked with at Yahoo. She went on to some amazing roles at Google and Twitter and some other things. I won't tell you other things because you'll forget who she is. And I said, God, how lucky were we to get our jobs at Yahoo when we did? You know, we were there at the beginning of consumer boom of the internet. She looked at me and said, no, I'm just really good and you're really good. And I said, no, I'm just really fucking lucky and so are you. And she just couldn't get over the fact that I really believed that it was luck that was the most important factor. And I think it's true. I mean, I have people who have worked for me who are much smarter than me and much more capable than I am, but they didn't have the same lucky breaks that I had, or they didn't make their luck. I'm not saying it's just dumb luck, but you know, luck is a big part of it. I moved to Chicago from Silicon Valley with my my California wife and my 3 California kids, and people thought I was insane. And I think that made all the difference in the world as it relates to, you know, some of my executive career evolution, you know, from 2010 to today. And I feel really lucky that I landed at Groupon and that I landed there when we were about to explode. And people would argue and say, no, you had the vision and you knew what was going to happen. I had no idea we were going to become the fastest growing company in history. It was an 80-person company when I got there. And I thought, you know, in a year or two, we'd scale up and do all the right things. And, you know, within 9 months, we were at, I think, 3,000 people. And within 18 months, we were at like 6,000 people. And you know, I think luck is the most important attribute. And I think that being said, you have to make your luck by making certain decisions, by working at certain companies, by going deep on blockchain, for example. Now's the time to do it. And who knows, maybe doing so, you'll create, a multi-trillion-dollar company based on this new paradigm. So to me, it's luck, but others would argue that it's, pure skill. In my case, I can guarantee it wasn't pure skill.
I'm going to jump on that and say, of course, you love the humble part of that, right? I mean, the fact that that's what makes you so likable and probably successful. And luck is a big part of it, but you have to take advantage. You have to find the luck, and you have to take advantage of it when you get there, right?
Yeah. So you have to make the luck happen.
Yeah.
And you never know exactly how to do that, but that's a big part of it too. It's not just dumb luck. It's making it's the decisions you make. It's the people that you stay close with. You never know exactly what will propel you, but I do think making your luck is a big part of the luck continuum.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Big round of applause for Rob. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go Bears and get lucky out there, I suppose.
That's right. Get lucky.
Rob, thank you for your incredible generosity and your sunny disposition.
Exactly.
Thank you guys.
All right, thank you.
That was fun.
Good luck at the rest of the school.
Yeah.